Mr. Speaker.
For the benefit of members, I'll just give a further indication that debate should address the level of funding contemplated in the agreement and its adequacy to support the bank's activities rather than the actual activities and their wider impact on the economy. I offer you that in the interest of being an efficient chair. I call Fletcher Tabuto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will try and remain within the confines as you have set out. This is a once in a 5-year opportunity to put on record, however, the views of the New Zealand First Party with regard to that relationship and the funding as laid out in this agreement. So I'll move on and please see how I go, Mr. Speaker.
I'll just remind that it may not provide that opportunity because it is to address the matters I've just outlined. So
Thank
we'll
you, sir.
Listen with interest.
Most New Zealanders will not actually know much about the bank aside from what they hear every several months about setting the official cash rate and interest rates. With regard to the funding, we actually used to print the New Zealand money in whangarei, sir. But in 1990, that work was sent offshore across the Tasman, and jobs were lost in New Zealand. It is perhaps emblematic of the two-tier economy that has seemed to have developed of late. The Reserve Bank of New Zealand Act was passed in 1989, which actually seems like a lifetime ago. Perhaps it is for Mr. Seymour. My point is that it was hailed as revolutionary and world-leading at the time. However, times have changed, sir, and the funding that this bill seeks to endow to the Reserve Bank must, in our opinion, ask the question about the relationship that New Zealand has with the rest of the world. What's happening out there? It would appear that having set what was good legislation for its time, that the Reserve Bank and this government have kind of got stuck in their ways and after 26 years are not willing to change their minds on how best to discuss an accord or go beyond the bounds of the agreements that are being debated today. So consider the staid nature of this agreement and consider the fact that, as spoken about today, inside of this House and outside, sir, there are actually discussions about change and the need for change. For example, I refer to the comments of Michael Riddell, ably reported by Hamish Rutherford, who described the powers of our Reserve Bank Governor as one of the most powerful on earth. Mr. Riddell ought to know, since he was Special Economics Advisor at the Reserve Bank until April. He describes the Governor's power to make the final call on both interest rate decisions and financial stability as outdated, risky and out of step internationally. And so this bill is about our Governor's salary and the relationship that he has with this Minister. So Mr. Peters was Treasurer. When Mr. Peters was Treasurer, the Governor of the Reserve Bank has since then turned into some kind of monetary policy demigod. In other countries, such power is not concentrated as it is here in New Zealand, and and these are not the words of an embittered former employee. Treasury has even lobbied for change themselves. They have seen the inherent flaws of investing such vast powers in one individual. In April, Reserve Bank Deputy Governor Grant Spencer called for fresh consideration of possible policy measures to address the tax-preferred status of housing investment. The nominally independent Reserve Bank, if you would picture this, sir, walked across the street into the beehive, took the lift to level 7 and essentially said to the Finance Minister, "Take a walk, we're taking over." While my party has issues with this government's economic policies, it is elected, sir, whereas Messrs Wheeler and Spencer most definitely are not, although to be fair, I can feel their frustration as this government inaction in particularly the housing market has been very frustrating for all. Sir, it is engaging in public policy by stretching the definition of financial stability so far you could bungee jump off the top of the building itself. What gives the Reserve Bank Governor a demigod-like power to say whatever it wants and to challenge an elected power? Sir, I put it to you, it is the Reserve Bank Act and the negotiations, this agreement that we are discussing today. This agreement is enabling these powers, and the relationship between the Minister and the Governor has not been clarified in this agreement. New Zealand First is not advocating for something along the lines of creating a Bank of England type committee. Unsurprisingly, New Zealand First has actually put a solution to the House when the Right Honourable Winston Peters put a members' bill before the House. I'll talk to some of the reasonings for it. In November 2013, before sanctions in Europe cut heavily into our export commodities, and before regional neglect was so blatantly exposed by the Northland by-election, the Right Honourable Winston Peters put his members' bill to amend the Reserve Bank Act twice in front of this House, and it was voted down both times.
And that needs to be applied to the motion about funding for the Reserve Bank.
I endeavour to do so, sir. No other, and sir, if you'll forgive me, I am talking about policy as it relates to what has been allowed through this funding document. The policy initiative could deliver so much in terms of the benefits to the New Zealand economy. The amendments put forward to the House were coined, sir, in such a way that the changes were needed so much because there is no more important piece of legislation that would benefit the rank and file provincial voters who hitherto have been voting for the National Party. The intention of this bill is and remains clear and compelling. Sir, the Reserve Bank Governor needs the flexibility to promote growth, exports and employment, as well as price stability. The reasons why an amended Act is urgently needed still remain. New Zealand is still not paying its way, proving some things never change. We still get the National Party line that everything is perfect. They've got a plan that is working. It is clearly not when departments such as this go to war and former employees call for decisive actions to counter current operational activity. Sir, we are not paying our way in the world. Instead, imports are up and exports are down. There is a budget surplus, which is so far just contributing. There is not a government surplus, my apologies. The budget is a not tax and then spend. It is a borrow and spend budget, with tens of billions of extra debt written off balance sheets through student loans, state enterprise debt and local government debt. The main factor underlying the current account deficit is a grossly overvalued dollar underpinned by a borrow and spend government. Sir, we need to consider that the funding agreement between the Reserve Bank and this government is insufficient in and of itself to provide New Zealanders with a good and positive outlook, that this agreement does nothing to hold this government to account. For example, if we look to rural towns around New Zealand and now our small rural cities, the provincial cities, and see how many shops are closed and how much there is a lack of action, the national members tell us, yeah, but we've got growth. Yes, but when we talk about the Reserve Bank and what growth is, sir, we have to ask ourselves, what is the quality of the growth and what is happening to the people who could save this country? So this agreement serves a functional purpose. It is insufficient in and of itself, and I do feel restrained in what I can say in the House today. This agreement does give rise to policy decisions and actions taken by the Reserve Bank, which I would like to have elucidated on in more depth. But, sir, there is much more that is required. Thank you.
I call David Seymour.